All right, welcome everyone to the Northeast Indiana Basketball Summit. I'm your host, Ben Smith, joined by my co-host, Jeff Metzger. Before introducing our guests, we want to thank Feel for the Game for providing the platform to have all these presentations live and available for replay. You can check out all the resources over at feelforthegame.com. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Mike Jagacki, video coordinator, Hofstra women's basketball. Mike's from Middlesex, New Jersey. He attended Middlesex High School, graduated from Rutgers in 2016 with a dual bachelor's in psychology and journalism. He has a YouTube channel, Coach Mike, with over 17,000 subscribers and 2.5 million views. He's owner of True Hoops AAU Basketball. Prior to Hofstra, he spent 4 seasons at Middlesex High School as a varsity assistant and JV head coach. From there, he moved on to Combine Academy in North Carolina for the 18-19 season. While there, he amassed over 48 wins. In the 19-20 season was his first at Hofstra as a video coordinator, where he was responsible for all aspects of video production. Welcome, Mike.
Thank you, Ben. I'm going to try and share my screen right now to get started. Is that good? You guys can see this now?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, first off, thank you, Ben and Jeff, putting this stuff together. I don't think enough praise and gratitude is shown to you guys who organize these events and the passion you show for sharing the game. And without you guys, we wouldn't have such a connected coaching community right now. So I thank you for that. And just want to get started here. And these are some links down here to get in contact with me. I'll put this back up at the end, but here's my Twitter, my YouTube channel, and my email. A little background. I know we just touched on it, but spent 4 years as a coach at Middlesex High School under head coach Jared Goldstein, a tremendous friend and mentor for me. Continues to be one of the best transition offensive coaches I know. Started True Hoops then. Great chance for me to really learn the ownership of a program and hire a staff and manage parent personalities, as we all know. And then gave me the chance to really join Lee DeForest at Combine Academy as his associate head coach. Had a phenomenal year there. Lee, a great friend and mentor still to this day. And also met Steve Lampford when I was there, the head women's coach. And he kind of gave me my first chance to get into the college coaching world at Hofstra University as their video coordinator last year. And if you know me outside that journey, it's probably from my YouTube channel. Or it might be from my talk I gave about a month ago at Coaches Summit. And for those of you who have seen that talk, I just want to let you know none of that material will be repeated. It's all new content. We're going to be focused on closeouts. And I wanted to break it up into these 3 categories. First, the closeout technique focused mainly on the lower body, how it's going to be most effective to cover the distance going from off to on ball. Then going into the principles and teaching, which is really going to guide the importance and what we're going to do with the upper body during our closeouts. And then finally, the drills and concepts to best implement these habits and principles in our players. And if we have any time afterwards, of course, to answer any questions that anyone has. These are just some topics I have material already on that I can dive deeper into. And but any questions, of course, are welcomed. So let's start talking about closeouts. Not going to say anything new with this first point, but obviously the 3-point frequency and efficiency has grown exponentially at every level. And it really hit me this year watching a high school game. I was watching this team who was in great defensive positions, jumping to the ball, closing out to their men, but time after time, they were just getting 3-point shots drilled on them. And it really hit me, the big gap between being there and actually making an impact on the shot. And Jim Boeheim has this great quote, there's a difference between contesting a shot and taking away a shot. And I know that not all defenses are geared to take away a 3-point shot, but we all want to impact it. And I do believe we can impact shooters. If you just look at, for example, Virginia men's team, over the last 3 years, they've been in the top percentile at impacting spot-up efficiency with their closeouts. And so a lot of the clips that I'll show today will involve Virginia, and especially 2 years ago when they were the #1 closeout team. And then finally, I believe closeouts are the most common situations a defender will be in. And it's kind of a Bill Belichickism, if you will, but he really believes in being great at the most common. And for him, it's tackling and blocking happens on every play, and that's what he wants to be great at, first and foremost. And if we look at it from a defensive basketball perspective, of course, we're all going to have to pick up and stop the ball. But after that, I believe the most common situation is going to be a closeout. And if I'm a great on-ball defender, but I stink at closing out, then it really doesn't matter because I'm just going to get shot over or blown by. So the importance of an effective closeout for not only your player's own defensive abilities, but your system's ability. And that leads us to the first point we have to make before starting. And that's that as coaches, we need to make sure our systems and our choices are putting our players in best position to succeed. And I talked on this point for the talk I gave last month. And so I won't go too much deeper into it. There is an excerpt on my YouTube channel just talking about the synergy between guarding ball, off ball, and guarding actions, and how they all need to really have a great succinctness to make sure our players are always in position to defend. And once you evaluate your defensive system properly, now we can start improving the players within it. And that starts first and foremost with their technique. And when we talk about closeouts, I think we need to break it down into two categories. A short closeout, which is really from one pass away, more in the gap, whether you're a pack team or up the line, you're still one pass away, a shorter closeout. And then you have a long closeout. And to be honest, in a short closeout, you're going to see more variance in different techniques because the distance to cover is shorter, and it's going to vary for each player. But in a long closeout, that job is a lot harder, asking a player to not only take away a shot, but to defend the ball. That's a hard task, and we need to make sure our technique is perfect to allow our players to have a chance at doing that. And so let's start with the hardest concept first, which is the long closeout technique. You'll see here, if we start this clip over, ball's about to be skipped. We got two players in help side position, and you'll see them both execute this technique here, which is going to get their far foot under them, kind of like a drop step, getting a positive shin angle, and then allowing this crossover step to really explode them square to their man. And you can see it done here properly. And one more example. You can see DeAndre Hunter here, going to get that foot under him, positive shin angle, drive it into the ground, which is going to allow him to cross over step in an explosive manner, square to it, and get to his opponent. And I like to think when I examine defensive techniques specifically, where do we see these techniques outside of basketball, right? We see a lot of similarities guarding the ball containing to soccer or pressuring in football. And so where does this closeout technique appear in other sports? And for me, it kept coming back to baseball, right? And you see a base runner leading off first base, getting ready to steal second. If this isn't a great gap or help side player in basketball, I don't know what is, right? Beautiful technique here. And then watching this player steal second, great explosiveness, covering a huge amount of space in a short amount of time. So I believe we can learn a lot from looking at baseball. Great stance, just like we want to see any of our defensive players off the ball, and great explosiveness out of that stance into what we would see as a closeout. So first, let's analyze what that's going to look like for a baseball player. And you're going to see that foot drop, just like we talked about, getting under their center of gravity, allowing them to push off. You're going to see their upper body kind of torque this arm moving back quickly and powerfully, which is going to allow this foot to drive into the ground. And then the momentum of the next step, the arms being in time with this crossover step to explode forward. So great technique in baseball that we can see in basketball as well. Another point they teach in baseball is knowing your max lead. how far can you get off first base and still be safe if the pitcher tried to pick you off? You know, it varies for every player in baseball, but knowing your max safety point is also going to be important in basketball too. And finally, just another look at this technique. Arm drive of the top body, positive shin angle, crossover step there. So now we go back to basketball. Can we see it in action? We're going to see Kyle Guy here, getting this foot under him, strong crossover step, getting out to the shooter from a really deep help side position and getting there on the shot release, being able to impact that shot. Again, let's see it here. DeAndre Hunter, more of a short closeout, but pretty deep here in the gap. So you're going to see the same thing here on this pass, positive shin angle, allowing that crossover step to explode to his man and get there on the catch. We just looked at one short closeout, but the technique is going to vary a little bit. And there's a reason for that. But mainly the main technique is going to be just more of a lead step and then a hop into your stance. And the reason it's going to be different than a long closeout, if you think about a long closeout, look at DeAndre Hunter here. If he was to close out to his man, he would have to pivot and turn 90 degrees to be explosive to his man. Whereas in a short closeout, really that's only a 30-degree difference to get square. So you're not going to see a crossover step in a short closeout. You're going to see more just a lead step. Still always more consistently from the inside foot though. So again, you'll see it here. He's in a short gap. This is going to be your first movement, what we would see a crossover or a lead step. And then he's going to bounce right into a stance. Again, Kihei Clark here, short closeout situation, drive this lead step, and then hop into a stance. And so again, the short closeout is going to be a little more varying when we're just talking about lower body technique, but you're going to see more of a lead step and a push slide kind of a movement there. The long closeout you need to perfect though. You're going to see that foot drop or pivot of the outside foot, the upper body torque, which is going to allow you to push off and explode using that crossover step to get square. And if you've been watching these clips close, you're probably wondering when I'm going to mention players chopping their feet or not chopping their feet. And if you saw in those clips, sometimes they did chop their feet, sometimes they didn't. And so my stance is kind of vague in that term. I know there's an NBA study done by the Grizzlies that concluded that actually chopping your feet on a closeout was less effective in impacting and containing the ball. So in both situations. So they are a big proponent of running to stop. I find it inconclusive though, because I haven't seen it backed up by any other team per se, with the coaches that I've talked to. And when you really study the film, it's really inconsistent whether guys chop their feet and are successful or whether they're just running and stopping as soon as possible into their containment. So it led me down the path of this question. Is chopping your feet a fundamental of the closeout or just a worst case scenario? And as we progress through this talk, you'll kind of find that we're trying to get rid of that whole gray area of whether to chop your feet or not and really get to an ideal situation where it's not even necessary. So what can we learn from baseball? What do they teach in baseball? Number one, you got to know your max lead off the bag. Number two, you got to be active and fidgety off the bag. And number three, you got to get a good jump. And it's amazing to watch players stealing second base and what cues they're reading to actually know when to get that anticipated jump. You'll see players just stare at the back heel of a pitcher, just the back heel, and that will tell them when to take off. And they'll study pitchers warming up to get used to their movement pattern and know when they can actually get a jump on that pitcher. So how can we apply these to basketball? Well, we got to know each of our players' max help ability. Every player is going to have a different ability off the ball. A worse defender isn't going to be able to help as much and recover to their man. So that's where not only knowing that is important, but knowing their matchups is important. If a worse defender has to close out to a non-shooter, they're going to be able to still maintain our system help principles because they won't have to close out to their man as tight. If that makes sense, hopefully we can answer any questions. If that doesn't, we'll get into some film to show that. Second, steal second base. This is a term I've talked to Tony Bennett's staff about that they use at Virginia. Steal second base. That means their players are anticipating the catch and being active in the gap. Really, you want to get a jump on that so you can be there on the catch or even before it. And if you can do that, if you can steal second base and be there on the catch, it's going to make your job a lot easier to taking away a shot and guarding the ball. And then finally, out of the gate properly, making sure that technique is done properly with the crossover step or the lead step. And so here's some video example. First, knowing your max gap. What's your own ability as a defender? Players like Ty Jerome and Kyle Guy, their max gap might only be this much off the ball one pass away, right? Whereas a player, for example, like DeAndre Hunter, a little more explosive of an athlete, probably a better defender in an simplistic world, his gap can be probably a lot deeper and can offer more help in the system because of his own ability to close out. So knowing your players' own max safety points and their help is going to be vital for not only their improvement as the players, but also who you match them up against. Stealing second base, again, Virginia term, but it's anticipating the throw. You can see Ty Jerome, I believe, right here. This player's driving into his gap. He's there to help prevent that. The player stops his movement. Looks like he's going to pass it, so he's already anticipating stealing second base, trying to get out to his man. Now, you'll notice he didn't pass it, but you can still see the concept ingrained in their players of trying to anticipate their man's catch and be there on the closeout. Again, here, already making his way out to the ball before that pass was even thrown. And same thing here with Kyle Guy. He's already on his way to his closeout just because he's anticipating this reversal of the ball. So now he's there on the catch. Same thing here, closing out, being there, recovering on the flight of the ball. Disregard this bottom portions from an old teaching tape. But again, the beauty of Virginia's players is how much they anticipate and are able to be there on the catch using the term steal second. Even in the NBA, you'll see it by great defenders. And then great technique. You got to be able to have that great crossover step, that great explosive of the drop step to really be able to get out to any player from a deep position. Great technique again. We already saw this clip, but great crossover step, great drop step. And so now once we understand the technique of the lower body and how we're going to go most effectively from off ball to on ball, now we can start talking about the upper body and the principles and teachings into actually impacting the shot once we get there. So first, just want to get us in the same mindset here. When I started coaching, I tried to devour as much information as possible. I became a big system guy, reading all this material, watching videos, talking to my mentors. But as we went against tougher and tougher opponents, you realize that the system is stressed a lot more because of individual breakdowns in technique. And so it really dove me into a focus of improving the individual players within that systems and their technique, because the more they would improve, obviously, the better our system would be. But what was most disappointing at the time was when I was searching for this material, I kept coming back to things like defense takes effort, heart, and guts. It's all about heart. It's all about hustle. It's all about toughness. And to me, I knew that's important, but that seems oversimplistic as a way to improve a player's defense. It's like taking a player and trying to make him a better shooter. And if you were to tell him, hey, you're just not showing enough effort on your shot, really dig deep and try your hardest to make this shot. This player doesn't show any heart in his shot. We would look at that coach like he was crazy, because we understand that shooting is so much driven by proper technique. And I really believe that's the same for defense as well. Of course, effort and heart is needed to be great at anything, especially in basketball. But if your players lack effort and heart on the defensive side of the floor, you probably have a lot more problems than just their technique. All right. And so effort and heart is needed, but it doesn't guarantee the success of a defender. I've had defenders desperately want to be great at their defensive abilities, but struggled to do so until they started training, they were taught, and they started practicing to get better at defense. And it really is a skill the more you dive into it. And it's our job as coaches to make sure we get the most out of their hustle, especially when they dedicate that hustle to the defensive end. And so now we can start talking about the principles and teachings that make for impacting a shooter. And the first thing is going to be early hand. You know, we've all heard it, but the dedication to it makes a big impact. On the catch, already showing a hand, already showing an early hand on the catch. You'll see Virginia players do it over and over again. Again, closing out right before the catch even, he already has an early hand up to discourage and disrupt the rhythm of the player shooting. Again, right here, already has a hand up, discouraging a shot on the catch. Even from a late rotation, out of position, still going to show an early hand, try and impact it as most you can. So that's number one. Number two, every player has a different distance of impact, right? So a player like, I believe Jagacki, 7 foot tall, his distance of impact, again, early hand, great early hand. His distance of impact is probably going to be different. He can probably impact a player's shot with 5 feet of space just because of his length and size. Whereas a player like Clark, who's on the much smaller side, his distance of impact is probably going to be, 1 or 2 feet away. So each player is obviously going to have a different level of impact on the ball, depending on their size, length, and ability. And again, going back to knowing your max help, Paul Pierce probably can't get out to this player if he was a shooter, because his max help isn't that big of a gap with his athletic ability to close out. But if this player is not a shooter, he doesn't need to get to that distance. He can get to this distance and still impact the ball with active hands. So his distance of impact is going to be different, also depending on his matchup. So 2 things, your distance of impact on a shooter and your distance of impact on your matchup. Challenge at the point of release. This is going to be the most important thing to impacting a shooter's shot. Pat Riley, teaching point. There's a difference between, coach, I was there contesting, versus you need to contest at the point of release. Right here, contesting at the point of release. Okay, again here, not only contesting, but getting to the point of release to really impact that shooter's rhythm and perception of his openness. Again, point of release. It also gives your players a realistic teaching point to get to. It's not only you have to have a hand up to contest, you need to get to the point of the shooter's release. Even Clark, shorter player, right at the point of release. And that's going to make a shooter the most uncomfortable. Point of release. And so those are the 3 main teaching points for the upper body on how we're going to impact a shooter. Show an early hand, know your distance of impact and your matchup, and then challenge at the point of release. And now that once we know the concepts, the technique, now we can start thinking about, all right, how can we transition this to teaching and drilling our players' habits? The drills we're about to go over are simple drills. They're not Instagram drills. You're not going to put them in social media and get a bunch of likes. They're simple because they're going to allow you to maximize your teaching and maximize the player's focus on the point you're teaching. So the simpler the drill, the more you can maximize your teaching and focus, we want to add a live component as early and as often as possible, especially on defense. Defense ultimately is not only about great technique, but also about anticipation reaction. And if we're not guarding a live component, we're not working on that mental to body connection. We want to choose drills that we can progress with, not only picking drills that just fit the day and the teaching we want to do, but drills that we have an end in mind, right? We're going to progress this drill by adding these layers that is going to get us to a point we want our players to be at. And then rep one-on-one defensive improvement as much as possible. You know, we as coaches spend a lot of time on the worst case scenarios, help rotations, but how often do we spend on improving the individual and getting rid of those help rotations of players breaking down on ball? So now we can start focusing on the drills. And this is just a simple drill we use in the weight room that's going to mirror kind of the technique we want to instill and create a habit. Medicine ball, wall toss, I'm sure we've all seen it done, but what's the purpose behind it? This hip drive, we're opening and square. Imagine this player's in help side, and this is going to be really the explosive hip turn and torque we want to pull this crossover step and get this foot pivot and dropped. Right, so that's a great drill to work on the microscopic movements of hip rotation. Second, you know, we want to drill the crossover step. This is just a simple way you can do that. Shuttles. So we have some cones down here. They're going to stand here, square to you, or you can have as many as you want. On the whistle, they're going to crossover step, driving off this foot, getting to that cone and sliding back. Hopefully those slides will get a lot better with this player. But now we can progress that drill and not only work on the technique, but build better explosiveness by adding body resistance. Something Patrick Beverly does a lot in his training, using resistance bands to improve the explosiveness of the movement. So we partner up, we put an elastic band on their waist, they're working on that drop and crossover step. Same shuttle drill, but we're progressing it and making it more explosive and getting more out of it. Single leg bound to crossover step is just another movement drill we're going to use. And especially if you're in the off season, you can't use basketballs like at some high schools, like we were at Middlesex. We want to focus on movement. So this single leg bound to a crossover step, what is that going to simulate for our players? Number one, they're sticking this landing, working on ACL prevention. Number two, it's going to work on a stunt and a change to a closeout, right? So this is a stunt, a counter movement, and then that foot's going to drop, getting to that positive shin angle, and that's going to be our crossover step. So that's just going to simulate the change of momentum of a stunt and recover that we would want to see our players use. And then, of course, repping it as a group as well. Hundreds of drills, you know, chair closeout drills, line closeout drills, but focus on the technique of the drop step and the crossover step. Again, active in the gap, boom, exploding, short distance closeout. See it in baseball all the time. Steal second. This is an interesting drill, kind of out of the box, but again, we want to add that live component with the technique. And so we want to build our players' anticipation cues. So we need to add the ball, and we need to make it kind of a goal in mind. So steal second is a drill we use. We'll put tape on the floor. We usually have 3 players here, each with a tape, and we call that their base, right? And so our players are off ball, and they need to get to base before the catch. And so it's teaching our players to be in gap, but get ready to steal second base and get to that base before the ball, right? And so you can make it competitive, 3 outs and you're out, things like that. And then obviously change it up, long closeouts, go skip passes from help, long to short, making sure we're closing out to the gap, and then our man. And I've even had our players go train with the baseball team in the off season, get a coach to put them through drills of stealing second base, just so we have cemented that visual in their head. And now we have that common term that we've used. And guys always like to get to outside their sport and try and show that they're good at other sports too. So stealing second base, just another idea here to improve your players' anticipation cues. The mirror drills I talked about a lot last talk to create good habits on the ball. We can just progress it to a closeout. This is a direct closeout. And again, we're not using balls in our off season per se. This is summer, so we are allowed to, but we're closing out directly on and then getting right into containing the ball with our lateral movement. So working on that is important, closing out right into containment. And our mirror drill is, the rules of our mirror drills, for those who didn't see the last talk, are just you're trying to stay even with this guy for 20 seconds. He's trying to get outside of your frame, outside of your hips to get a point. And then as you progress this drill, if you're working on closeouts, we need to change this player's body angle, right? So he will be facing this way, not in this example, but as we progress, so that he has to close out to this mirror at a 90 degrees, simulating help side position to a closeout. Might even want to do a 30 degrees, simulating a shorter gap. But changing the angle of the mirror closeout drills is going to be important. Close the gate is another on-ball drill we use to teach proper habits, which was a drill I went into last time. Again, containing, cutting off, keeping your hips square, not dropping your hips. But again, adding a closeout element to this drill, teaching our players not only to close out properly, but also be able to contain the ball once they get there. We don't want to see that ever, dropping our hips, getting handsy. And again, your players will struggle with any drill early on. But if it's a good drill, if it's simple, their focus will be maximized and they'll get better as they progress through the drill. You can see a huge improvement with just 2 minutes of focus and in the drill. This is a drill that's a little unique, but it's definitely, it's one UVA, I talked to UVA staff about that they use, and they think it's the number one thing that correlates to their closeout effectiveness. And it's good enough for them, it's good enough for us, right? So we start, the drill starts one-on-one, no dribble. So one-on-one, no dribble. It doesn't have to be as far away as this, but this player is obviously working on his pivots, his pump fakes, trying to get space to get a shot off. This player's working on tracing the ball and being active. And what they're really learning here is their distance of impact, right? So as this drill progressed, they're learning that, all right, if I'm this close, I'm actually impacting the shooter every time he shoots. If I'm this far away, I can impact him still. And so a player like Kie Clark in this drill will learn that if he's guarding Ty Jerome, he might have to be here in this drill to actually impact the shot. A guy like the center probably could be here and still impact the shot in this drill. And again, you can add different elements to make it competitive. If this player goes for a pump fake and leaves their feet, this player gets a point. They get a point if they make the shot. They get a point if they get a stop. Things like this to make it competitive, keep it trackable. But again, the players are learning habitually what is their distance of impact. And then you want to progress the drill, obviously. Progress the drill. 1, fake game, no dribble. They're learning their distance of impact. Your offense is learning patient pivots. Number 2, you add 1 dribble. So now not only is the player, what is my distance of impact if he shoots the ball, but now I also need to contain. And so Virginia uses a very slow progression, but they call it shadow boxing. Because once a player learns, all right, this is my distance of impact, now when they're off ball, they know that that's the distance they need to get to. They don't need to get super tight. They can't be relaxed. My distance of impact is here. So every time I close out, I need to get to that point. And that's what this drill is trying to instill in your players. And so that's going to wrap it up for the drills there. Again, most important points for me in closeouts: know your impact as a player, know your max lead as a coach for your players, steal second base. You got to be there anticipating, explode, square, the techniques, but you got to anticipate. You got to steal second base. If you can get there on the catch, it's going to make your job a lot easier to containing that ball. And then early and high hand, challenging at the point of release, discouraging rhythm. And the crossover step isn't only used in closeouts. On the ball in a full court situation, you'll also see that crossover step to get in recovery mode. You see it less in the half court because you have less room to recover. But if you're a team that presses, this crossover step is going to allow your players to better recover to the ball. So not only a good technique to practice closeouts, but also recovering on the ball. And so that wraps it up for us. For me, I won't go through all these points. You might be bored of hearing me, but perimeter protectors are becoming more and more important than rim protectors. Make sure we as coaches are valuing our defensive specialists just as much as our offensive specialists. Really look into your practice habits. Are we improving our individual defenders or just working on how our system's going to handle them? Because the more we can improve our individual defenders, the better our system is going to be. And then, heart and effort is important. But if you add great technique, then you really have a chance to be successful. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer any questions. Again, if you want to email me or reach out on Twitter, happy to connect and answer any questions.
Oh, Mike, once you started talking about it, I know it was the upward and the forward stance was the previous one.
Yes.
I recommend, of course, anybody interested in technique and like attention to detail, go watch that one. And the crossover step, you mentioned it at the end. The more I was watching some of my former girls at Indiana Tech, one girl, her freshman year, really struggled. But then I noticed this past year, every time she would, their pickup point is full court for the point guard, so she spends a lot of time zigzagging. And that drop step and that crossover is just, you see it once you understand what's going on. So one question, or one kind of thing that I always ran into a bunch of times. So especially at the high school level, on closeouts, players want to try and contest the shot, of course, but I think we don't do a good job of teaching the technique. And I tell them, especially at the lower level, I tell them just to stay down because no one in the history of basketball has ever been known as being a great three-point shot blocker. But once you know the technique and can actually drill it, I think it becomes really, really effective. So I'm interested to know if you've done any research or correlation on fouling on three-point attempts based on technique, or if you've seen anything as far as that goes.
Yeah, well, I'm definitely with you on when I was at the high school level, giving up the shooting percentage of a high school player is not as good as their foul shooting percentage, and they're more efficient. So I would never want to leave my feet at a high school level. You see Virginia leave their feet all the time to contest second jumper, as a term we usually hear. Obviously, the more you get into greater and greater shooters, the more you have to sacrifice the impact of their shot. So it really depends on their level. I've been more of a conservative coach like you, stay on your feet, impact at the extent of your reach, but don't jump, be ready to go get that rebound. So it varies from level to level for me and coach to coach.
Yeah,
but no studies I know of about.
I really like that challenge, the point of release. That's a teaching point I will for sure use. But Jeff, did you have any comments or questions for our guy, Mike?
No, it was great, very informative. The one question I wanted to ask you is, what got you started into coaching?
Good question. Not a great answer. I mean, not like I was a sophomore in college, and I tore my ACL. I played pickup every day. Didn't play in college. I played in high school. I tore my ACL though, when that kind of took away athletics for me in my state. So I started diving deeper into the techniques and the systems of basketball, because it was something I loved and something I couldn't do physically anymore. So as I started to learn more and more about the game, my roommate happened to get a coaching gig with a youth team, fourth grade AU team. He asked me to be his assistant, and that's how it all started for me. I became his assistant. Loved challenging the players, getting the most out of them, forming deep relationships with them, helping them reach their goals, and really built a passion that I've continued ever since then.
Nice.
Awesome. Well, there'll probably be some questions in the comments once we post the video later, but there's none right now. I think this was great. I really appreciate you, Mike. Of
Yeah.
course, appreciate you, Jeff.
Mhm.
That's all I have. If you have any more closing comments, we can wrap it up and then let you get on with the rest of your day.
No, thank you again. What you guys, you guys are needed during this time for sure, putting these things together. So, and with the list you put together, honored to be a part of it.